at any point?
How can you help your company become good at AI? Based on my experience starting leading the Google Brain team, as well as Baidu's AI group, which were respectively the leading forces for helping Google and Baidu become good at deep learning and AI, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it takes to help a great company become a great AI company. And I wound up writing an AI transformation playbook to help other companies on this journey. In this video, I'd like to share with you the details of the AI transformation playbook so that you can better understand what it might take for your company to become good at AI. In case some of this seems like things that only CEOs need to know, I think that's not the case. It's useful for everyone in the company to understand what it might take for your work to impact not just a few projects, but maybe have a bigger impact on the company as a whole. Let's get started. Here are the 5 steps of the AI transformation playbook. We'll dive into greater detail in a little bit, but briefly, step 1 is for your company to execute pilot projects to gain momentum, start to know what it feels like to work on AI projects. Step 2 is to build an in-house AI team. Step 3 is to provide broad AI training, not just to engineers, but to many levels within the company, including executives. Step 4 is to develop your AI strategy. And step 5 is to develop internal and external communications about your company and AI. The way your company will execute the steps may not be totally sequential, and so the different steps may overlap, but this numbering gives a maybe rough sense of the order in which I think you could do these steps. In this video, we will go in greater depth on the first 3 of these 3 steps, and the next video will cover steps 4 and 5. Let's start with step 1, executing pilot projects to gain momentum. If you want your company to gain momentum with AI, the most important consideration for the initial project or projects is for them to be successful rather than necessarily be the most valuable. For example, when I was leading the Google Brain team, there was still a lot of skepticism at that time about deep learning. So my first internal customer was Google's speech recognition team. And speech recognition is nice to have. It's useful, but it's actually not the most important or valuable project for the company's bottom lines. It's not as valuable as, for example, web search or online advertising. But by having my team make the Google speech team more successful, it started the flywheel turning, helped us get momentum because then the peers, the other teams that are brothers and sisters, the speech team, started to see my team make the speech team more successful. And so they also started to gain faith in AI and wanted to work with us. So my second internal customer was the Google Maps team to improving the quality of the maps data using deep learning. And with the first and second successes, I then started other conversations with the online advertising team, for example. So when selecting your initial project, try to pick something that you think has a good chance of success that can start the flywheel turning, even if it may not be the most valuable project that you could eventually do for the company. Because the goal of the first few projects is just to gain momentum, is also nice if you can pick something that can show traction within 6 to 12 months. So you can start the flywheel turning quickly. Finally, your first 1 or 2 pilot projects can be either in-house or outsourced. If you do not yet have a large in-house AI team, might be possible, might even be advisable to outsource some or all of your first couple AI projects in order to get more expertise in-house and to let you start building that momentum faster. Now, beyond a certain point, you will need your own in-house AI team to execute a long-term sequence of maybe many dozens of AI projects. And so step 2 is to build an in-house AI team. A lot of companies are organized like this, where there's a CEO and multiple business units, which I'm going to abbreviate with BU, that reports up to the CEO. So what I recommend for most companies is to build a centralized AI team and then to take the talent in the matrix organization and to matrix them into these different business units to support their work. Why a centralized AI team? Let's take an example. Maybe this unit is your gift card business unit, and the BU leader may be great at whatever he or she does. They may be great at the gift card business. But unless he or she is knowledgeable about AI and knows how to build, retain, and manage an AI team, it may be very difficult for that business unit leader to hire and retain and appropriately manage their own AI talent. So in that case, I think your odds of success will be much higher if you find an AI team leader that can be responsible for consistent company-wide standards for recruiting, retention, have a centralized AI team to give the team a community to talk to each other about how AI applies to your business vertical. It may be more efficient to take the AI talent in your centralized AI unit and matrix them into the gift card business unit so that your AI talent can work together with the gift card domain experts in order to develop interesting AI projects together. One other responsibility for the AI unit is to build company-wide platforms. If there are software platforms or other tools or data infrastructure that could be useful for the whole company, then a single business unit may not have the resources or the incentive to build these company-wide platforms or resources that can support the whole company, but a centralized AI team may be able to help build these company-wide tools or platforms that can help multiple business units. Finally, this new AI business unit can be under the CTO, the CIO, the Chief Data Officer, or the Chief Digital Officer, or it could also be under a new Chief AI Officer. The CAIO, Chief AI Officer, is a role that I'm seeing more and more often in different companies. But if some other senior executive has the right skill set, they could also manage the AI unit. Finally, one last recommendation, which is that I think it is helpful if to get the AI unit started, the company or the CEO provides funding to build up the AI unit rather than require the AI unit to get funding from the business units. Eventually, after the initial investment and after the initial ramp up, the AI unit will have to show its value that it's creating for the business units. But having CEO inject funding at the outset so they can get going will often help you get that initial momentum much faster. In addition to building an in-house AI team, I also recommend that you provide broad AI training. Now, for a company to become good at AI, it's not just that you need engineers to know AI, you need multiple people at multiple levels of the company to understand how AI interacts with their roles. For example, for executives and senior business leaders, I recommend that they learn what AI can do for your enterprise, that they learn the basics at least of AI strategy, and they learn enough about AI to make resource allocation decisions. So how much training should executives and senior business leaders receive? I think that numbers of hours of training is not a very good way to measure training, but with that caveat, I think you can deliver a lot of this training with maybe 4 hours or so of training. Leaders of divisions working on AI projects also need to know how to interact in their role with AI. I think these leaders would need to understand how to set project direction, so how to conduct technical and business diligence, how to make resource allocation decisions at the division level, as well as how to track and monitor progress of AI projects. So this type of training, I think, would take at least 12 hours, although again, number of hours is not a great metric for tracking how much you're learning. Finally, many companies are hiring AI talent from outside, but I would also not underestimate the importance and the impact of training up your existing engineering workforce with AI skills. For a software engineer to become proficient at AI does take a while, so plan for maybe at least 100 hours of training. But I'm seeing many companies provide training to help engineers learn to build and ship AI software, to gather and manage data, as well as help them become effective at executing on specific AI projects. The world today does not have nearly enough AI engineers, and so in-house training is a key part of many companies building up of their in-house AI capabilities. Finally, how do you get all this training done? Thanks to the rise of online digital content, ranging from, of course, online courses to also books and YouTube videos and blog posts, there is a lot of great content online about all of these subjects. And I think a good CLO should work with experts to curate this type of content and motivate the teams to complete these learning activities rather than necessarily create content, which is a much more expensive thing to do. So with steps 1 to 3 of the AI transformation playbook, I hope that your company will be able to start to execute on initial projects, build a team, provide the training, and really start to get a lot of momentum going in terms of helping your company become more valuable or more effective using AI. Looking at the broader picture, AI also affects company strategy and how you align different stakeholders, including investors, employees, customers, with this transformation of the company. Let's go on to the next video to talk about AI strategy.
Okay, so anyone wants to see the video again? Okay, so I think we are good to go. Yes, so for the first step, Shashank.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ready?
Yes. Actually, the main theme of the video is to uh, enhance the AI in the in a company. So first coming to point, to help a great company to become a great AI company, he is explaining key roles. What are the key roles? I mean, in the manner of playbook and the major roles which to be followed. And he mentioned the five points in the playbook. And first one is the executing the pilot projects to gain momentum and building on in-house AI team and provide broad AI training and develop an AI strategy and developing an internal and external communications. So, and this playbook is not applicable to the only startup founders or CTO or CEO. This is applicable to all the students or trainees or who are working in the AI field for the improvement of their life easier in the AI field. So first one, executing the pilot project to gain momentum, and this is the most important step for the initial stage or the initial stage of the project. And he explains that it's very important to uh, get the first project to succeed rather than it's getting more valuable. It should not be valuable. It should be succeed because it gives us confidence and it gains slowly momentum. And the amount of time period is 6 to 12 months. 12 months. And coming to another one, uh, and building an in-house AI team.
No, Shashank, you have to explain only the first step.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, so the second step, for the second step.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, coming to the summary of second step, it is said that it would be more efficient to execute projects by AI support team, ma'am. Because there would be, because suppose let's consider a company which is having a CEO and many business units, ma'am. So what does this AI, so we are adding on an in-house AI team so that it would be building an AI capability to support the whole company. And coming to another feature, it also develops consistent standards for recruiting and retention. And it also builds a company-wide platform to support multiple business units, ma'am. Like and these in-house AI would be under
Voice is breaking.
CTO. Hello, hello, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the second point is that, as I said before, to develop consistent standards for recruitment and retention, ma'am. And another feature for this in-house AI team is to build a company-wide platform to support multiple business units, rather than individually working on the by rather than development by individual division, ma'am.
Okay.
This comes under control of like CTO, CIO, CDO, and many things, so that efficient execution of project is done by this in-house AI team. And this is the conclusion of the second task.
What about the funding part, which you told for the AI
Fund.
unit? Yes.
Funding actually would be from like main there, as said in the video, there would be many uh, considerations, and it would be from, I think it would be from CAI,
Okay, not from the business unit.
AI officer. Yeah, from the business unit itself.
From the business unit. Okay. For the third point, yes. Okay, Satyadhar, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So the third point is providing broad AI training. So it can be summarized into three levels. The first level starts at the top of the chain, that is the executive level. Now, they don't need a lot of technicalities in their curriculum, but they need to know what AI can do, what it cannot do, a few case studies here and there, just to make sure that they know what AI can actually do for their organization. Then the second level is the division leader, basically, who will be responsible for handling a team that will carry out the AI projects. Now, they need to have a little more technical knowledge, at least the basics, so that they know what their team will be working on and how to guide them in the right direction, and of course to allocate resources and to monitor the progress of said team. Then lastly, at the ground level are AI engineer trainees. They require the most training because they will be the ones who will be working hands-on the project, and they will be responsible for learning the entire technicalities, and they'll be responsible for building the projects and deploying them, and of course handling the data that comes with it. And lastly, to do all of this, to provide this training, it is the responsibility of the chief learning officer to have an efficient approach to curate this content instead of creating it from scratch, because creating content would be extensive and expensive, and it would be tedious. And that's basically step number 3.
Correct. Good, Arindam. Very good. Okay. So, rightly pointed by all three students. So, for the first point, as you can see, the idea is to develop the pilot project to gain momentum. So basically, if you see that he told that when he was working with Google Brain, he worked on a speech recognition project. So speech recognition is not a very crucial task. It is a good enough task or good enough feature in any module. So it is not as important as web searching in the Google. Now he started doing this pilot project so that he could gain some momentum and could get success. So if your team is gaining success in a good enough project only, so that will give you confidence, as Shashank already mentioned. That will give you confidence, and not only you, to your peers also, to nearby people also. That will help in gaining the initial momentum, the confidence, which is very important when you are working with something very new. So that's why the idea is to start working on something which you feel is going to give you good results, which will give you some, to you as well as to your team, some confidence. For the second point, he mentioned that you can build an in-house AI team, or you can obviously outsource also. It's better to build an in-house AI team. Obviously, it will be less expensive rather than again outsourcing your project for any other AI team, because your company might be then eventually will be expanding and different AI projects will be there. So it's good to have an in-house AI team only, and there should be a different business unit and a separate AI unit. So different business units are the one which are specialized in a particular business. Let's say a gift card business, which the example which he got. So they are specialized in one or other domain. So these are the specialized unit, but they don't have the knowledge of AI. They have the knowledge of that domain, but not of the AI. So it's better to have a separate team of AI, and different set of people can join the different business unit. Different AI people can join the business unit and can help them in the AI part. So that way, for the business part, they are already specialized. They can do that thing on their own. With the AI part, the AI team can definitely help. They can send some of the people might be working with different units, and that way it can be a overall complete package, that you have the knowledge of the business field also and the AI field also. And it is better to have different funding for complete different funding for the AI unit also. The funding for business unit and AI unit, he said, should be separate, so that the AI team also gets the confidence that they themselves are also a different team which are specialized in AI, and that way the things will be better. Third thing he mentioned, as Arindam has already very well summarized, that you have to provide the AI training at different levels. So majorly the company is divided into three levels. If we talk, we have the senior executives in the company, who basically make the strategic decisions and execute the strategies or basic AI strategies. They are not so much related to the coding part or actual working the implementation part. Then second level is the division leader. So division leader is a mediator between the first executives and seniors and the engineers. So he must be having little bit knowledge about both the world. So he must be, yeah, he must have some knowledge about the technical field also, so that he can communicate and explain with the and talk with the engineers, as well as with the business knowledge, so that he can communicate the progress of the engineers to the executives and seniors. So that way he should have the basic knowledge of both the worlds. And obviously he monitors the progress of the AI engineers and tells that to the senior executives and all those things. And finally we have the main AI engineers who gather the data and who work on the specific AI projects. So, and for all these things we require training. So he mentioned there are online training available and online resources available. And majorly the problem is that we do not have the required AI engineers all around the world. A good amount of AI engineers which who actually have this AI knowledge, because people usually claim that we have worked on two to three projects, so we know AI. No, so that is not the case. So the providing the AI training is very important. So these are the three steps in the AI transformation playbook. So let's look at the fourth and fifth step, so that this transformation gets completed. Let me just. Yes. So this is the third step. Sorry, second video, fourth step. Yes.
How to execute pilot projects to gain momentum. In the last video, you learned how to execute pilot projects to gain momentum, build an in-house AI team, and provide broad AI training. But if you want your business to not just gain momentum in the short term using AI, but in the long term be a very valuable and maybe even defensible business, what can you do? Let's talk about AI strategy, as well as perhaps important for some companies, internal and external communications relative to AI. To recap, this is the 5-step AI transformation playbook. And in this video, we'll dive more deeply into these final 2 steps. Step 4 of the AI transformation playbook is to develop an AI strategy, which I hope for you may mean to leverage AI to create an advantage specific to your industry sector. One unusual part of this playbook is that developing the AI strategy is step 4, not step 1. When I shared this with many CEOs, a consistent request or piece of feedback I got was, can you please put the strategy as step 1? Because I'm going to figure out what is my company strategy, then want to find the resources, and then I'll execute on the strategy. But I found that companies that try to define the strategy as step 1 before getting your feet wet, before trying out AI and knowing what it feels like to build an AI project, companies like that tend to end up with sometimes very academic strategies that are sometimes not true to life. So for example, I've seen some CEOs copy and paste newspaper headlines into their strategy. We read that data is important, so you say, my strategy is to focus on collecting a lot of data. But for your company, that data may or may not be valuable, may or may not be a good strategy for your company. So I tend to recommend to companies to start the other steps first, execute the pilot projects, start building a little bit of a team, start providing some training, so that only after you understand AI and understand how it may apply to your business, that you then formulate your strategy. And I think this will work much better for your company than if you try to formulate an AI strategy before your company, including specifically the executive team, has some slightly deeper understanding of what AI can and cannot do for your industry sector. In addition, you might consider designing a strategy that is aligned with the virtuous cycle of AI. Let me illustrate that with an example from web search. One of the reasons that web search is a very defensible business, meaning it's very difficult for new entrants to compete with the incumbents, with the existing large web search engines, is this. If a company has a better product, maybe a slightly better product, then that web search engine can acquire more users. And having more users means that you collect more data because you get to observe what different users click on when you search for different terms. And that data can be fed into an AI engine to produce an even better product. So this means that the company with a somewhat better product ends up with even more users, ends up with even more data, and does an even better product with this link being created by modern AI technology. And it makes it very difficult for a new entrant to break into this self-reinforcing positive feedback loop called the virtuous cycle of AI. Fortunately, though, this virtuous cycle of AI can be used by smaller teams entering new verticals as well. So I think today it's very difficult to build a new web search engine to compete with Google or Baidu or Bing or Yandex. But if you are entering a new vertical, a new application area where there isn't a entrenched incumbent, then you might be able to develop a strategy that lets you be the one to take advantage of this virtuous cycle. Let me illustrate with an example. There is a company called Blue River that was acquired by John Deere for over 300 million US dollars. And Blue River makes agricultural technology using AI. So what they did was build these machines that would be towed behind a tractor in a big agricultural field. And this machine would take pictures of crops and figure out which is a crop and which is a weed and use precision AI to kill off just the weeds, but not the crop. So I knew some of the founders of Blue River while they were Stanford students taking my class. And so to get the project started, they actually just used scrappiness and sweat. They used their personal cameras and went out to a bunch of farms and took a lot of pictures of crops in these agricultural fields. So they started to collect pictures of heads of cabbage and weeds around the cabbage. Once they had enough data, start off with a small data set, they could train a basic product. And the first product, frankly, wasn't that great. It was trained on a small data set, but it kind of worked well enough to start to convince some farmers, some users, to start to use their product, to tow this machine behind the tractor in order to start culling weeds for the farmers. And once this thing was running around the farms through the process of taking pictures of heads of cabbage and killing off weeds, they naturally acquired more and more data. And over the next few years, what they did was they were able to enter this positive feedback loop where having more data allows you to have a better product, having a better product allows you to convince more farmers to use it, and having farmers use it allows you to collect more data. And over several years, entering a virtuous cycle like this can allow you to collect a huge data asset that then makes your business quite defensible. And in fact, at the time of acquisition, I'm pretty sure that they had a much bigger data asset of, pictures of heads of cabbage lying in a field than even the large tech companies had. And this actually makes the business relatively defensible from even the large tech companies that have a lot of web search data, but do not have nearly as many pictures as this company does of, heads of cabbage lying in the agricultural fields. One more piece of advice. A lot of people think that some of the large tech companies are great at AI. And I think that's true. Some of the large tech companies are very good at AI. But this doesn't mean you need to or should try to compete with these large tech companies on AI in general, because a lot of AI needs to be specialized or verticalized for your industry sector. And so for most companies, it'll be in your best interest to build AI specialized for your industry and to do great work on AI for your application areas rather than try to compete or feel like you need to compete left and right with the large tech companies on AI all over the place, which just isn't true for most companies. Other elements of an AI strategy, we are going to live in an AI powered world, and the right strategy can help your company navigate these changes much more effectively. You should also consider creating a data strategy. Leading AI companies are very good at strategic data acquisition. For example, some of the large consumer-facing AI companies will launch services like a free email service or a free photo sharing service or many other free services that do not monetize, but allows them to collect data in all sorts of ways that lets them learn more about you so they can serve you more relevant ads and thereby monetize the data in a way that is quite different than direct monetization of that product. The way you acquire data is very different depending on your industry vertical, but I have been involved in what feels like these multi-year chess games where other corporate competitors and I are playing multi-year games to see who can acquire the most strategic data assets. You might also consider building a unified data warehouse. If you have 50 different data warehouses under the control of 50 different vice presidents, then it's almost impossible for an AI engineer or for a piece of AI software to pull together all of this data in order to connect the dots. For example, if the data warehouse for manufacturing is in a totally different place than the data warehouse for customer complaints, then how can an AI engineer pull together this data to figure out what are the things that might happen in manufacturing that causes you to ship a faulty cell phone that causes a customer to complain 2 months later? So a lot of leading AI companies have put a lot of upfront effort into pulling the data into a single data warehouse because this increases the odds that a engineer or a piece of software can connect the dots and spot the patterns between how a elevated temperature in manufacturing today may result in a faulty device that leads to a customer complaint 2 months in the future, thus letting you go back to improve your manufacturing processes. There are many examples of this in multiple industries. You can also use AI to create network effects and platform advantages. In industries with winner-take-all dynamics, AI can be a huge accelerator. For example, take the ride sharing or the ride hailing business. Today, companies like Uber and Lyft and Ola and Didi and Grab seem like they have relatively defensible businesses because they are platforms that connect drivers with passengers, and it's quite difficult for a new entrant to accumulate both a large rider audience and a large passenger audience at the same time. Social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook are also very defensible because they are very strong network effects, where having a lot of people on one platform makes that platform more attractive to other people. So it's very difficult for a new entrant to break in. If you are working in a business with these types of winner take all dynamics or winner take most dynamics, then if AI can be used to help you with growing faster, for example, with accelerating user acquisition, then that can perhaps translate into a much bigger chance that your company will be the one to succeed in this business vertical. Strategy is very company and industry and situation specific. So it's hard to give strategy advice that's completely general to every single company. But I hope that these principles give you a framework for thinking about what might be some key elements of an AI strategy for your company. Now, AI can also fit into more traditional strategy frameworks. For example, Michael Porter many years ago had written about low cost and high value strategies. If your company has a low cost strategy, then perhaps AI can be used to reduce costs for your business. Or if your company has a high value strategy to deliver really, really valuable products with a higher cost, then you might use AI to focus on increasing the value of your products. And so AI capabilities can also help augment existing elements of a broader corporate strategy. Lastly, as you're building these valuable and defensible businesses, I hope that you'll also build only businesses that make people better off. AI is a superpower. This is a very powerful thing that you can do to build a great AI company. And so I hope that whatever you do this only in ways that make humanity better off. The final step of the AI transformation playbook is to develop internal and external communications. AI can change a company and its products, and it's important to communicate appropriately with the relevant stakeholders about this. For example, this may include investor relations to make sure that your investors can value your company appropriately as an AI company. Investor relations may also include government relations. For example, AI is entering healthcare, which is a highly regulated industry because government has a legitimate need to protect patients. And so for AI to affect these highly regulated industries, I think it's important for companies to communicate with governments and to work collaboratively with them in public-private partnerships to make sure that AI solutions bring people the benefits it can, while also making sure that governments can protect consumers and protect patients. So this would be true for healthcare, it would be true for self-driving cars, it would be true for finance and many other AI industry verticals. If your products change, then consumer or user education will be important. AI talent is very scarce in today's world. And so if you are able to showcase some of your initial successes, that could really help with talent and recruiting. Finally, internal communications is also important. If you're making a shift in your company, then many people internally may have worries, some legitimate and some less rational about AI, and internal communications to reassure people where appropriate can only be helpful. With these 5 steps, I hope it gives you a vision for how you might be able to help a company become good at AI. If you're interested in reading the detailed AI transformation playbook, you can also download it from this Landing AI website. I hope you enjoyed these 2 videos on the AI transformation playbook.
Okay. So now, okay, coming to this fourth step, yes, Jagan.
Yes, ma'am. So previously in the third point, we saw that the people at all the levels need training. So in the first role which we see is that executives and senior business leaders require are the key role and who control the AI strategy because they are the people who guide the whole enterprise. So it is. I thought that mostly this AI strategy comes firstly to that role, followed by the other roles that are descendants of the main executives. So the first thing in AI strategy which we see is that it is the key role that differentiates all the industries. So the first 3 points are general to every company, but coming to the third company, we start using AI, which is correct. I mean, which is what our industry or our company specifically requires. Now it is actually common to think that why don't we start by thinking what is required for our company at the first. So what Andrew Ng tells us that when since the executives and the senior business leaders are the ones who take all the decisions, we cannot assume that they know all the technicalities of how to implement AI. So the problem with putting AI strategy as the step one is that these senior leaders might misjudge the AI's capabilities. And one of the example he gives is that an executive might look at the news saying that data is important, so he fixes his mind to making that we have to more concentrate towards getting the data and all. So what happens is that the putting it as a fourth step means the first 3 points establish a proper infrastructure. So whenever the executives take any role, I mean, should have to take any decision, since in the second point we have already established an AI team, we do have someone to take advices from. So it would be helpful to move the company in the right path. And the second point which we see is that our strategy must be aligned to the virtuous cycles of AI, which means that generally if the product is launched, we saw a cycle where it says that you build a product and you get more users. From more users, you get more data, and with more data, you build a better product, and it keeps on going. So when you compare yourself with any of the bigger tech companies, they are already established and inside the cycle. So if you start with something which is core to your business, it is very difficult for you to establish your business in the market. So that's the exact reason why the first point is choosing a pilot project. This pilot project would not be something that is crucial to your business. So your business keeps continuing, but since you're entering the AI, this pilot project would be very new to the industry. So you can start however you want, and even if you fail in that pilot project, you can try to rebuild, and it would not affect your business in a very large way. So that is what he explains in the second point. And as an example, he gives the case of Blue River, where they have built an agricultural technology for tractors, which go on with the tractors and take images of the weeds and keep killing the weeds. Since this is a new technology, there is no one competitor for them. They tried it, they failed initially, but again they improved it. So since they built a very new product, there are some users who are willing to take risk and try the product. And as they use this product, they got more data and they kept on implementing. So that is the right way how they have entered this cycle of AI. And finally, Blue River was a successful company, and John Deere acquired them since it was successful. So the second point mostly says that don't compete with the big technologies, enter the completely established ones. Try using any new technology which is not done. That is the point in the first slide of AI strategy.
Very well summarized, Jagan. Very well. Manav?
Yeah, I think you covered most of the points. So
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
just
You want to add something?
yeah, yeah. Just I think few of the points are like you said, instead of like making a general AI product and competing with the big companies, you should sort of leverage sectors that are untapped and that don't have a lot of products. And then the virtuous cycle of AI, which you mentioned, so I can account for that. That I mean, it usually works. The place that I work for, even they use they started the POC that they started with did not have much training data, but as the product grew, as they acquired more users, they were able to retrain the model and build some sort of continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline, which meant that their product only got better over time. And on top of that, there is also the point of data, which is the key asset for AI systems. So 3 points that he mentioned. The first one was strategic data acquisition, which means that instead of like looking at short-term gains and being able to collect small amounts of data, you should make multi-year strategies that help you acquire data over time. Like Google, for example, has Google Maps. Now that's a free product, and something as useful as Google Maps should not be free, right? But what users don't realize is that they are paying for Google Maps in the form of data. So Google is collecting massive amounts of data from Google Maps and even other products for that matter. Anything that Google has for free is basically data. And in this day and age, in the 21st century, data is money. So they are getting paid.
Correct.
And then
indirect monetization is there.
yes, ma'am. So, and the second point he mentions is unified data warehouse, which basically means that, data can't just be put anywhere, right? So you need to like create some sort of data pipeline, some ETL pipeline that can store massive amounts of data in data lakes on AWS and such. So you can structure and organize data and keep it safely in some place in order to access it later. And then also, the final point is that you need to recognize what data is valuable and sort of discard the redundant data and the data that is not useful, and just like extract the key information or the key data points that are crucial for building the product. And then finally, he also mentions that you need to create a good network that can help you leverage the platform that you're building. That's about it for the fourth point, I think.
Correct. So I think both of them has very well summarized this fourth point, which was very crucial, and both of them have done a great job in explaining it. So for the fifth point, Varun, quickly can you just summarize the fifth point, because the time is also up.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, for the fifth point, it was develop internal and external communications. So, if we look at any business that's successful, we know that the communications with the stakeholders, that is the investor relations, have to be good. Otherwise, we won't get the funding or the like funds for the running the company and to paying the employees. Apart from that, they also mentioned government relations.
Varun, your voice is not audible.
Hello.
Ab bolo.
Yes, ma'am. So, like I was saying that government relations, in government relations, you can say that each country has a government and they provide like healthcare, finance for the nation and stuff. So we need to tie up with the government, like we need to provide benefits to the people so that the government will see value in our company and like we can tie up with them. Then aside from that, we have the customer or user education point. Why would we need this? Like you can say that if we choose a product in Amazon, like we are looking to buy a product in Amazon, so we don't just blindly buy the product. First of all, we look at the feedback from different people. So this is kind of a similar thing. Like unless people know what are the benefits of AI, like they will be reluctant to use it. And this comes to the point of talent and recruitment. And because of because like and you mentioned many times that there's a scarcity in the AI talent field. So we need to like show the people or the our like if say the future employees like what we have achieved in the past. Like we need to show them our initial success. And the last point was internal communications. Like I could say that any company which will have internal conflicts will be like will face its doom sooner or later. So it's important to clear all the internal like conflicts in the company. So like you can say that clearing the internal communications and addressing the employees such that the concerns will reduce will help the company in an overall manner for the long term.
Correct. So I think these six people have done a very nice job in explaining all these 5 points so in such a detailed way. So I think with this, I am ending this lecture now because time is already up and I think I have crossed the time. So you can leave now and I'm ending this meeting. Okay? Chalo. Thank you then.
Thank you, ma'am.